I'm very pleased to say Stephen is our guest tonight on the show. Hello.
Hello. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
People talk about you as a super instrumentalist, a great band leader, a great composer, but not many people talk about you as a lyricist in the same kind of terms. But you clearly put a huge amount of what you do into the writing of those lyrics, don't you?
I do. I'm very happy, you've kind of made that observation, because I think one of the problems with playing the kind of music I do is that people tend to dismiss the lyrical side of it as being mostly about sci-fi and, hobbits and things. I'm talking about the sort of world of progressive music. And I've always been very interested in, inner space, not outer space. And nostalgia for me is a fascinating subject. And a lot of my songs are about nostalgia for childhood, about regret, about loss. And Perfect Life is a great example of that.
And they're also, am I right in thinking mortality comes into it quite large?
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think mortality is something that we're all obsessed with from a very young age, aren't we?
We're conscious of the fact we're not going to be here forever.
Well, exactly. And I think, if you look at what kids listen to heavy metal, don't they?
Yeah.
Some of them do anyway. And that's a music that's almost exclusively about death, and I think that kind of shadow hangs over us from a very early age and kind of fascinates us, yeah.
So, have you published lyrics as a kind of separate thing? Like, is there a book of your collected lyrics, or do you tend to integrate that with each album release?
I do special edition. I do very kind of elaborate special editions of all the records. So there are books, but they're kind of books with the CDs and the DVDs included.
And none more so than Hand Cannot Erase.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful thing, yeah.
So, for the sake of listeners who don't know about it, could you explain what the kind of deluxe edition of that album involves?
Yeah, well, Hand Cannot Erase was a story, basically, just to backtrack a bit, was inspired by the real-life events of a woman called Joyce Carol Vincent, who about 10 years ago was found dead in her flat in North London, and her body had been there for more than 2 years. There's a fantastic Carol Morley documentary called Dreams of a Life about it. And I saw this documentary, and I thought, what could be more representative of, life in the 21st century, living in the city, than this story? Because this thing about this woman is she wasn't, I think your immediate reaction is she must have been a little old lady, and she wasn't. She was a young, attractive, popular young woman who, for whatever reason, was not missed by her friends and family. And the more I thought about that, the more I think, you think, how can that be? And the more I thought about it, the more I could understand, yes, that is quite easy to understand how that could happen, particularly in the heart of a city like London in the 21st century. So I started to write this record about this imaginary young woman. My character was kind of inspired by Joyce Carol Vincent, about a young woman who comes to live in the city and effectively begins this process of disappearing, erasing herself. Now, and I had this problem. How do you tell a story when the story is from the point of view of someone that's almost in complete isolation? And the answer, of course, you do it through a diary, or the modern equivalent now is a blog, an online blog. So I created this kind of online diary and online blog and illustrated it with all of the kind of documents and ephemera that would go along with a life. So birth certificates, postcards, letters, mixtapes, the inserts from a mixtape. And they're all kind of loosely inserted into this book. So it is almost like it's kind of got this scrapbook variety.
I love that in the lyric here. We'd listen to her mixtapes, Dead Can Dance, Felt, This Mortal Coil. There's a whole other life beginning there.
Well, that's my life, I think that's the thing, is that when you create a character like this, of course, you have to invest it with something that people are going to really believe in.
Yes.
And for me, that was my mixtape. So I gave her a lot of my own history, if you like. Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
So this means that the artifact, if people want to go that deep into this story and into this record, is enormously elaborate.
Well, it's one of those things where people say to me all the time, is it possible to enjoy your music without being kind of familiar with all the background of the story? And I hope it is. I hope people can listen to Perfect Life, for example, and just find it, a nice pop song or a beautiful experience.
Yeah, we played it last year without me knowing any of this, just because I liked what it sounded like.
Okay, good. So I'm happy to hear that. So that's kind of an answer to your question, is that there is this sense that the music exists without all of this kind of background stuff. But if you are curious about that, there is this whole other level that you can go to, and this whole kind of story that kind of unfolds using the music as its kind of medium.
But you have in the past made the point about music being art rather than mere software,
which makes me sound really pompous, you know. But I love kind of throwaway pop as much as the next man. But the thing is that there is this kind of modern phenomenon, which is that people don't engage with music the way that they used to, the way that I did when I was a kid. And that is a tragedy for me. And so I will always try and, raise the issue that music is art. It should be presented as art. It should be engaged with as art. And that makes me sound like a very pompous person sometimes. But I do think it's, a serious point.
You have made the point that you don't you don't enjoy a movie by sitting down and watching 5 minutes from the middle scene,
right,
halfway through the 2.5 hour epic, and that you're making kind of movies for the ears with these albums.
Yeah,
and again, I don't want to kind of labour that, because we don't want to, as you say, don't want to make you sound pompous, because there's a lot of humour and kind of sparkle and playfulness in all of this.
Right.
So
I hope so. Yeah.
Definitely. And that I understand that when you were recording the track we're about to hear, it was known affectionately among the musicians in the studio as the Pop Tart.
Oh, the Happiness 3. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, I grew up loving pop music. And the thing is that a lot of people have this idea that I grew up just listening to very serious, weighty, concept albums about the human condition. And I did, because my dad listened to those records. But my mum was listening to ABBA and the Bee Gees, Saturday Night Fever.
Donna
Summer, Georgia. And I love those equally. So I've always had this part of me. And I grew up in the 80s. I was into bands like Prefab Sprout and OMD and all this wonderful kind of, pop music. Tears for Fears were one of my favourite bands growing up. And so I've always had this kind of love affair with pop too, but it's never the thing I felt the most comfortable doing. I don't think I'm a good enough singer, really, to be able to make pop music. One of the things about making this sort of conceptual rock is I think you can put more emphasis on the kind of instrumental side of things, But occasionally I will come up with something that just feels like a reasonably, by my standards, reasonably convincing piece of pop music. But I have this kind of paranoia about letting it out into the outside world. And this song's been around I can't tell you how long ago I wrote this song, at least 10 years ago. And it's been permanently reduced, put on the subs bench with every album I've done ever since. And finally, I've had the guts to actually release it into the world, yeah.
Thank goodness you have. Let's take a listen. This is Happiness 3.
Something in this town is draining me. Could be the junk food or the gasoline. I hide it well. Cigarette for 100 years. I'm not as much of a slave to it as I appear. I'm just bored. Sorry, that was cruel. I only meant for you to lose your balance in the snow. So I can catch you fall. Sorry, that's not true. I didn't think that you would take it all to heart. I'm tired of burning up the time that my basic. I only end up downloading the same old pornography. get out of bed. Is there anything I can write that I haven't read? It's all been said.
Winning combination, really. Accessible songwriting and killer playing.
Thank you.
Happiness 3. It comes from a new album called... Well, it's a mini album. When is a mini album an EP?
You tell me. Well, the thing is, it's 37 minutes long. Now, when I was growing up, that was definitely an album.
Yes.
But the difference here with this album is that this is not an album conceived as such. It's kind of tracks that have not found a home elsewhere, which kind of makes it sound like they're leftovers. And in a way they are, but not because they weren't good songs. I mean, as we already discussed, all my albums, I have this kind of conceptual conceit going on. So sometimes there are songs that just don't fit in, and it's not because they're not good songs, as in the case of Happiness 3, just for whatever reason I don't feel they quite fit with the album proper. So here we've got a kind of rounding up of these orphan songs, if you like.
So we've called it 4.5.
Called it 4.5.
It comes between album 4 and album 5.
Well, it was a good way to make it so that I didn't have to explain all the time that this wasn't the follow-up album to Hand Cannot Erase. It's kind of implicit in the title.
Yeah. Now, is that a single? I mean, what do we mean by a single?
You tell me.
Do singles even exist anymore?
Well, we were talking before about how occasionally I come out with these songs that I think, wow, that's really radio friendly. And then there's always this rude awakening as I discover that radio is not quite as I imagined it is anymore, 20 years ago, I think Happiness 3 might have had a chance to get on, playlisted on radio. But now it seems to me that even that kind of sound is too strange, dare I say it, for daytime mainstream radio.
It's difficult. I mean, Six Music is not your typical station, and we get some stuff like Tune Yards coming onto the playlist,
Okay.
where I'm delighted to say that the strange and the bizarre and the adventurous and records made on a dictaphone can get onto the daytime playlists. But I take your point totally.
It's certainly not from want of trying, anyway.
If only there was more stations that were that adventurous out there in the world. Triple J in Australia, have they taken your stuff at all?
Oh, pass. I couldn't tell you. I don't know. It's a whole world that for so long has not been on my radar for obvious reasons. That one day I hope to be pleasantly surprised.
But then here you are with multiple Grammy Awards, nominations certainly, and really escalating sales, and your solo records outselling anything you did with Porcupine Tree. It's
still, present company accepted, pretty much invisible in the mainstream. Yeah.
2 nights sold out at the Albert Hall last year.
Yeah, but I mean, when I say the mainstream, I'm talking about newspapers, the magazines, the radio station, and I think it is something to do with the kind of music that I'm perceived to be connected with. So the fact that I come out with a song like Happiness 3, it's almost like, and I'm kind of making assumptions here, but I'm guessing that the producers of these radio shows don't even listen because they've already got this idea of the kind of artist that I am and the kind of music that I play, if you know what I mean.
Do you remember those adverts from Guinness? Well, you probably were too young, but in the 80s they had these adverts for Guinness that had a picture of a man and looking at a pint of Guinness. He was going, "I've never tried it because I don't like it."
Right.
It's a bit...
Preconceptions. Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of that. But, one of the things that I do feel is that people don't listen with their ears; they listen with their other senses a lot of the time. But
that works in favour as well, in terms of an artefact of a record being more than just a piece of software. That people like the tactile aspect of it.
That's the good side of it. But what I meant by that is that sometimes people because they've read something about you, that's how they listen to the music. Not the music per se, if you see what I mean.
Now, you are on record as saying that some of the 70s the giants of 70s progressive music have been almost kind of shamed into disowning or feeling bad about their own music. And it's only now that it's finally getting valued for what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think there was a period of about 20 years, starting in the early 80s, when that music was almost written out of history.
But it's like the artists themselves got brainwashed.
They really did. I mean, if you speak to people like Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, for example, when I first, because I've been remixing some of these albums in surround sound, there was an album he made in 1973 called A Passion Play. And the reviews were so bad at the time that I think he hadn't listened to it in the 30 years intervening. He'd almost convinced himself it was a worthless piece of junk. And I had to keep saying to him, no, it's a masterpiece. Honestly, it's a masterpiece. And when he came to listen to it, he was like, actually, this is pretty good, isn't it? And he'd forgotten how good it was, And I think there is a sense that the ice has melted a lot with a lot of those bands. And part of that is down to the internet, because the internet removes this kind of layer of tastemakers that have been telling the listeners for years, this is junk, you shouldn't listen to that, you should listen to this. You should listen to Iggy and the Stooges, don't listen to Yes. You should listen to Can. Don't listen to ABBA, listen to Can, which is fine. I mean, Can and Iggy Stooges is great too, but there's this whole kind of group of artists that were almost brainwashed into believing themselves that what they did was not worth listening to.
Into this revisionist view of...
absolutely, And it's nice to see that ice is melting, and it's partly down to the fact that there is now this whole layer of filter that's gone, because kids can go directly to the music on Facebook and YouTube now.
And also the barriers between the artists and the consumers have been eroded to a large degree.
Yeah, otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here now. Because if I had to rely on the traditional means of breaking through to an audience, that was still kind of prevalent when I started in the early 90s. I mean, it was still the traditional route. You made a demo, you got a record deal, you got tour support, all that stuff. But if I'd had to rely on that, I don't think I would have had a career. Luckily, the internet was in the ascendancy at that time.
Oh, I don't think you're being entirely fair to yourself here, because you began with Porcupine. Well, you did music before Porcupine Tree, but I think that the first foundations of the later career, am I right in thinking, would be 1989 when the first Porcupine Tree cassette was put together and circulated into a very small audience.
Well, the thing that enabled me to become a professional musician was a band called No Man, a trio I had, which was more coming from DJ culture. And we got assigned by a label called One Little Indian, who were very hip at the time. They had the Shaman, they had Bjork, they had the Sugar Cubes, and we were promoted as part of this kind of hip new generation of bands. And we got great reviews, but sold no records.
Right.
And at the same time, I was making these quirky little records as Porcupine Tree in my studio, thinking that no one was going to be interested, and almost found this audience by accident that continued to grow. And before I knew it, there was like a fan website. So the music kind of proliferated through word of mouth, whilst my day job, in inverted commas, was being in this band that were getting all this kind of, praise from the music press, but finding no audience at all. It was an interesting lesson to learn.
So you made an 80-minute cassette called Tarquin's Seaweed Farm, and that got some interest in certain circles where word of mouth began to spread.
And Mark Radcliffe picked up on it. I think he was at Radio 1 at the time, started playing this one song over and over again called Radioactive Toy. And we did a session for him. I had to put a band together just to do this Radio 1 session. I mean, that's how kind of informal it was at the time.
Well, the band, but you had a fictitious band at the time. Steve.
It was all the members were imaginary. I mean, I presented it as a band. You see, you have to remember in the late 80s, no one was interested in solo artists in the late 80s.
No.
It wasn't until the likes of the Aphex Twin came along, these sort of bedroom artists, that. So you had to. I mean, I kind of pretended to be a band. I invented all these silly people. You know?
For instance, Sir Tarquin Underspoon,
Yeah.
Mr. Jelly, the Exploding Flan,
Yeah.
Timothy Tadpole Jones,
Yeah.
Sebastian Tweedle Blampton
It's all
III.
ridiculous, yeah. But there is a precedent for this. Do you remember XTC had a band called the Dukes of Stratosphere?
Yes.
Well, it was exactly. I mean, I was XTC is still one of my favourite bands of all time, and I was massively influenced by anything they did. So they had the Dukes of Stratosphere. So you know, Andy Partridge, I think his name was the Red Curtain in the Dukes of Stratosphere, and then Colin Moulding was Sir John Johns. I might have got those names wrong, but anyway, there was a precedent for this, so I was kind of aping them in a way.
Well, 10 years before that, of course, there was Ruben and the Jets from Frank Zappa.
Right,
Okay. But we'll touch base with Frank Zappa in a few minutes' time. So we're going to hear a track from the follow-up EP to Tarquin's Seaweed Farm called No Luck with Rabbits.
Your unpleasant family smashed up my car. Perfectly uncalled for. Your unpleasant family, how vile they are. I crawled out of the wreckage, I tore up my flowers, so what did we learn? Snips of the life we had in the garden. We tear up the fence.
Your Unpleasant Family from the last Porcupine Tree album in 2009, The Incident, which got 2 Grammy nominations. And before that, a record that got no Grammy nominations, whatever, which was Love, Death and Mussolini, a 1990 cassette EP, which your record company press release says with admirable understatement had a very limited run of 10 copies.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is the most limited
edition to end all limited editions. Yeah.
10 cassettes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I saw one go on eBay for over £1,000 in the last 6 months. A cassette for over £1,000. Yeah. Crazy.
That's mad.
Yeah.
Have you ever kind of rescued those recordings and put them out in some
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, that track was also on the first Porcupine Tree official vinyl. We kind of compiled the best from about 3 or 4 tapes. And that was one of the tracks on it. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned earlier on that a precedent for having a band of fictional musicians or musicians working under pseudonyms or whatever was Frank Zappa with Ruben
and the Jets.
Ruben and the Jets.
Yeah.
because he couldn't get played on mainstream American radio.
Right.
So he made a rock and roll album,
Right.
and loads of southern stations playlisted the
Right.
Reuben and the Jets album. And as soon as they found out it was Zappa, they stopped playing it.
Right, of course. Well, there you go. That's exactly what I was saying. That people don't listen with their ears, do they?
It's not about what's in the grooves.
No.
But there are parallels between Frank Zappa and yourself in terms of a virtuoso guitar frontman writing material and then unleashing killer, ridiculous. I mean, they're ridiculous in when musicians talk to each other, use the word ridiculous. That means phenomenally good.
Right.
Phenomenally good musicians.
So when Miles Davis used the MF word, yes.
Yes.
It was a positive thing.
It was
yes.
a positive thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, you flatter me with comparing me to Frank Zappa, but it is a valid thing because those are the kind of guys I grew up wanting to be. And people talk about me as a musician, and I never really saw myself as a musician. I saw myself as someone who wanted to make records. I wanted to be the architect of these kind of sonic journeys, you know. So I didn't grow up listening to people like Jeff Beck. I was more interested in people like, you know, Stanley Kubrick as a filmmaker, or Frank Zappa or Roger Waters as artists, because they weren't the greatest musicians. Frank Zappa was pretty good, having said that, but they weren't the greatest musicians. In fact, Zappa had better musicians in his band than he was, you know. I mean, he had phenomenal world-class musicians. And I find myself in a similar position now, you know, very, very grateful to be in the position I am now, where I can hire these extraordinary musicians to help me realise these things that I hear in my head. And this was always my ambition, was to be, even before I knew what the word meant, I think I wanted to be a producer rather than a musician, if that makes sense. I mean, when I was a kid, I was listening to, you know, Jeff Lynne and Giorgio Moroder, and I would see these, you know, the word producer. I didn't even know what it meant, but I kind of implicitly understood, I think, that this was somehow the guy that was in control of the whole thing. He was the director.
But when you mention those people, they aren't just record producers. They are people who write as
Yes.
well as producing.
Yes.
So they
Yeah.
compose the stuff and then make it happen in the studio.
And they do whatever they need to make it sound as good as they possibly can. So if that means bringing an orchestra or a choir or getting in world-class musicians, then that's what they do. So there is this kind of, you're kind of steering the ship in the right direction, yeah.
It's interesting, though, the musicians themselves, though, the people who are capable of playing to that level, are quite often not great composers themselves. That if you leave them to their own devices,
They play jazz fusion. 90% of the time, great musicians end up playing jazz fusion. No, I think that's true. And I think it's almost like there's not enough space in your brain to do everything, you know. So you get people like me who are relatively, you know, quite poor musically speaking, compared to the musicians that I have in my band. But I'm the guy that actually has this sound in my head and kind of knows what I want. And so it's a wonderfully kind of, you know, symbiotic relationship between these world-class musicians and me, the guy that can't really play, but I know how to get the best out of them to make these records.
I think it's not an uncommon syndrome at a
No, not at all.
lower level. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, for myself, I know that I can play the bass guitar fairly badly, but I can get people into my bands who can play really
You're
well.
the guy with the vision. Yeah, yeah.
And would you agree that, in a sense, that kind of front person for the band is able to sort of almost set free the people with the musical chops by giving them a framework they can
Absolutely.
work within, so they can shine
Absolutely.
and give of their very best, because there's a structure that somebody else has brought to
Absolutely.
it.
I think there's nothing great musicians love more than to be in the service to music that they can have fun with and they respect and they enjoy playing, you know. And that's why I think, you know, gigs with people like Frank Zappa or Peter Gabriel will always be the greatest gigs for a session musician to get. They can go and play jazz fusion and ridiculously complicated music, but to play actually in the service of great, you know, songs and great material, I mean, I can't speak for all of them, but certainly from the guys I've had in my band, I think they really enjoy playing in the service to these songs, yeah.
Let's hear them doing just that. This is Sunday Rain Sets In.
Yeah.
forthcoming album, 4.5, out via K-Scope on Friday week, the 22nd of January. That Sunday Rain sets in by Stephen Wilson, who's our guest on BBC Radio 6 Music tonight. The spy theme, you call that?
Yeah, that's very much my spy theme. You know, I was thinking of like movies like The Ipcress File. Who was it did the? Was it John Barry did the soundtrack for that? Anyway, that kind of vibe to it. Yeah, smoky and moody.
We've mentioned the internet being a positive force in terms of destroying the monopoly of the big record companies in being the intermediaries,
Right.
and the media generally in being the tastemakers who decree what you can and can't like and
Yes.
what you can and can't eat. But there are downsides to it. One
Absolutely.
of which
Yeah.
is piracy,
Yeah.
and another of which is fragmentation of music. I mean, where do you stand on things like Spotify?
To me, it's a very ugly way to listen to music. You know, I sound like an old man when I talk about this, but I know I'm not alone, and I know there's a lot of kids that feel this way too, because I get a lot of kids these days bringing me vinyl to sign. So when you've got kids who don't have a nostalgic attachment to vinyl, getting into vinyl, you know that the pendulum is beginning to swing back in the other direction, and that even the younger kids are looking for some way to have a more kind of tactile relationship with the music they listen to, and to, you know, and to treat it like art, like we were talking, to really engage with it as art. But still, we do live in a world, you know, where streaming is now, you know, the dominant form, the way that people listen to music, or YouTube or whatever. For me, that's very, very ugly way to listen to music. To me, the analogy is like looking at a beautiful masterpiece or a painting as a JPEG on your phone. You can still appreciate it's a great picture, but you're not getting anywhere near the full qualitative experience you get if you stand in front of that painting in a gallery. You see the way the light reflects off the paint, the texture of the paint, the way it's framed. All of that stuff completely goes out the window when you have this kind of jukebox mentality of songs just streaming off of a website.
That's a brilliant way to put it.
Well, it's convenience winning out over qualitative experience, which unfortunately is the history of the human race in a way, and our relationship with technology. Convenience always seems to win out over qualitative experience.
But on the other hand, surely streaming is the new airplay. I mean,
Absolutely, yeah.
radio airplay, there just simply aren't enough hours in the day or radio stations in the world to cover the wealth of brilliant music that's out there. So streaming is the way that we can deliver stuff.
Which is why I have had to embrace it, you know, because at the end of the day, if you're a musician, although I don't make the music to please other people, once I've made the music, I want to share it with as many people as possible. That's kind of a natural, you know, kind of thing as an artist, or for most artists anyway. And so if you want to share your music these days, you have to embrace these modern ways that people kind of listen to music and engage with music. But it doesn't mean I love it, you know. I still would encourage people always to go and buy a CD or steal it or whatever, you know, or to listen to a vinyl or whatever. Or even better, high-res audio off Blu-ray, you know, surround sound.
But this attachment to vinyl, is that because analog is better?
I don't have an attachment to vinyl. I love the physicality of vinyl, but actually a lot of records sound terrible to me. They have to be really well cut, really well mastered, and not many of them are. And they have to be beautifully silent pressings, and not many of them are. For me, the number one format would be Blu-ray, really high resolution audio, which even then a beautifully recorded digital album can sound as good as any analog at high resolution, 96/24. And surround sound is even better than that, you know, to be in the middle of this immersive three-dimensional experience. So I would encourage people to go more towards that rather than vinyl.
You said earlier that you didn't really see yourself as being a guitarist. Ideally, you wanted to be the kind of eminence grise that put the whole thing together and got other people to play it. But you also have found yourself increasingly in the role of frontman on a stage as a performer.
Yes.
And gaining confidence and ease with the whole process.
Certainly learning to be a yeah. I mean, since I've become a solo artist, I've had to learn really to be a frontman, and that's meant sometimes putting the guitar down and just standing up and singing the songs. And listen, I'm not a great singer. I have a very limited voice. I think it works within the context of my music. So it's actually been about learning to perform and to project and be some kind of presence on stage. And that's been something I have only really started to do. Even though I was standing at the front with Porcupine Tree, I could always kind of hide behind the fact I was in a band and I was the guitar player. Now I have a guitar player in my band that's infinitely superior to me, so there's no excuse for me not to put the guitar down sometimes and just literally kind of project and perform the songs. And I've actually really grown to enjoy that role.
Now you're going on tour.
Yeah.
How long is the tour and where is it covering?
It's a long tour. I mean, touring these days is just kind of an indefinite process. I mean, we on and off until September already. I have shows. I mean, breaks. The summer is more festivals. But in the immediate future, I'm going to Germany for 10 shows. Then I come back to the UK for 5 or 6 shows, I think, end of January, and then France, Belgium, Holland.
And these shows that you do, the level of production, it isn't just you and a bunch of musicians standing on a stage playing some music, is it?
No, it's what they call a multimedia experience, which it basically means you've got some visuals too. And I have, we talked about the artwork, before. I have this thing where, for me, if you're a musician or you're an artist, your job does not end with the delivery of the music master to the record company. Your job continues through to the artwork, the way you present the website, and the way you present the live performance. So I have films, I have screens, I have quadraphonic sound. It's a very immersive multimedia experience.
That must make your sound engineer crucial to the whole process.
Absolutely is. My sound engineer has been with me for 15 years now, and I couldn't do it without him, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming to tell us about all this. We're going to finish with, I think, my favourite track from the whole new album, 4.5. This is My Book of Regrets. Just before we hear it, can you just set the picture for us, set the scene for this song, put us in the right frame of mind to listen to it?
Well, My Book of Regrets is another song that was kind of written as part of the Hand Cannot Erase cycle. So it's another song about an individual and kind of the feeling of being very much isolated within the heart of a major city, which very much in my mind is obviously the city we're sitting in right now, London.
We've had a text message from Ellen Lindley saying, great vocabulary in this interview, so refreshing, bright, clever, substantial, strong. Thank you very much, Stephen Wilson. And also MB Ellen Medina C says, Stephen, we are waiting for you in Chile.
Chile, I'm going to be there at the end of middle of March. Looking forward to it. Love that place.
Thanks so much, Stephen.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Taxi cab in London town. It's like watching TV with the sound turned down. 'Cause I can feel it. I've got a buzzing in my head when I'm on my way. I see the kids deserting ships like shopping malls. Streetcars, they ignore their girlfriend's calls, 'cause they got plans now, and tonight they won't be home. All of this can be real, and my book of regrets. Don't let it bring you down. Just wait till the morning comes. Saw looks and teenage wrecks in subway worlds, and torn touch when drag queens fight suburban girls. But they don't care now, Just wait till the morning comes. To her apartment, oh sacred harbor. When she locks the door, she could slip away. Looking out behind the curtains, fighting drunk, she barely seems to notice. And the gas first starts to buzz when the rain sets in. the ground. Yes, I'm someone, but I'm no one all the same. All of this can be real. I might break every breath. All of this can be real. I might break every breath. Don't let it bring you down. Just wait till the morning comes.
That's the full 9 minutes and 36 seconds of My Book of Regrets from Stephen Wilson from his forthcoming album 4.5, which is out on Friday week via K-Scope. That's on the 22nd of January. And many, many thanks to Stephen for that extraordinarily candid and insightful look at his whole field of music and his career to date. I hope we can get him back on this show, find some excuse for it before we're all very much older.